to Moses. The book gives it records God's instruction given at Mount Sinai for worship by his people. Some major themes for the book is focused on worship. And one value is to help us to understand the nature of the worship portrayed in the Old Testament. There are about three key words here throughout the book that you find in the book of Leviticus. The first one is the word holy. It's found about 87 times in the book. And it helps us to realize that worship involves far more than ritual. There's a necessary moral component in our worship to God. The second word and the synonyms of the word sacrifice, and the synonyms of the word sacrifice are found about 300 times in the book. And I found that was interesting. Sacrifice, or synonym, is offering. Words used approximately 300 times in the book of Leviticus. The third word is atonement. It appears about 49 times in the book. As we look at Leviticus, we come to understand why understand the way these three words are used and how they function with the worship system in Israel. And I think it helps us to better understand our own relationship with God. If you look at an outline, and I was trying to put it on a PowerPoint, and I couldn't get the picture in there into the PowerPoint. But if you give an outline of the book, I'm going to give kind of a brief outline of the book. The first section here in the book, from chapters 1 through 7, it deals with about sacrifices and offerings. The first one dealing with the burnt offering. It goes in detail about the offering of the bullock and the offering of the sheep and goats, which we find familiar about the lamb without spot and blemish as Christ in 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 19. It then, dealing with the burnt offering, it talks about the offering of fowls, and that's still in the first chapter, verses 14 through 17. The next offering it talks about is the meat offering or the meal offering. It then goes in detail about the priest and how they are to burn a portion and then retain some of it. It talks about the leaven and the honey is forbidden to be burned on the altar, and also the offerings to be made with salt. It then, the next offering, it talks about the peace offering, which is found in chapter 3. The peace offering, and it goes in detail about the peace offering. In chapter 4 to chapter 5, it talks about the sin offering. What I found interesting about the sin offering, in chapter 4, they give an offering. There are many reasons why they give a sin offering, but one of them, if a sin is done through ignorance. I think we had a study on that a while back, but a sin that's done in ignorance, they do a sin offering for that. Also, if a high priest sinned, then they do a sin offering for that. If the whole congregation of Israel sinned, then the offering is done for that as well. Also, a sin offering is done if a ruler sinned or if a common person sinned. Those are some reasons why they would do a sin offering. And the chapter in chapter 5 deals with 3 specific things that are requiring a sin offering. The next offering is talks about the trespass offering. Again, they do a trespass offering. I'm at chapter 5, verse 14. If a trespass is done through ignorance, they didn't know, so they do an offering for that. Also, you trespass offering if you fail to pay your tithes, an offering to God. It's found in verse 15 through 19. That's a trespass. Also, the next one, trespass, is done that if you deal falsely with your neighbor, then you have trespassed against your neighbor, and so an offering will be done for that. That's in chapter 6. Then it goes in detail about rules concerning sacrifices. It talks about the rules or a detail about various rules concerning the priest and what they are to do in handling the sin offering, for example, or the offering of a meal offering. It talks about how the fire on the altar is to never go out. That's in chapter 6. Then it starts talking about the burnt offering, the rule concerning the burnt offering, instruction for handling the sacrifices. Also, you're not to eat of the fat of a sacrifice nor any blood ever. That's in chapter 7. Then it goes in detail about the section dealing with sacrifices in general, and that's in chapter 7. The second outline, or the second section of the book, will be chapters 8 through 10, which deals with the priestly system. It first talks about the consecration of Aaron and his sons, and then relates that to Christ as being our high priest. Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 1, Hebrews 5 verse 1 through 10, and Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 11. It then goes in detail about the anointing of Aaron and his sons, the sin offering for Aaron and his son, the burnt offering for Aaron and his son, and also the ram of consecration offered for Aaron and his son. Then in chapter 9, Aaron's offering for himself and for the people. Then also in chapter 9, the priestly blessing of the people. And then and also in verse 4 of the same chapter, then God's accept the sacrifices by fire. Then in chapter 10, it moves to some historical sections regarding the priesthood. For example, it talks about a familiar one that we're probably most familiar with, is the sin and punishment of Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron. Then it talks about the law of wine and strong drink for the priest. We are priests, as shown in this section here. Our body is a temple, and I believe we had a study on that recently, 1 Corinthians 6 and 19. Our bodies should be holy, Romans chapter 12, verse 1 through 2. Then it talks about how we are to carry ourselves, or we look at this section here about how we are to look at ourselves and our body as being the temple and holy. And we need to be able to distinguish between what is holy and what is unholy. That's chapter 10 and verse 10. The priests are to be teachers of the people. We too need to be teachers of the people. So if we're a priest in ourselves, then we need to be teachers of the people, just like the priests were in the Old Testament of the priestly system. Matthew chapter 28 and verse 19. Also, in the same chapter, the law of the priests of eating holy things. The priests were to eat holy things, and I thought that was interesting too. We as priests look at ourselves as priests, how we need to be eating, so to speak, holy things as well. And that's verse 12, verse through 20. The third section of this book is chapter 11 through chapter 17. In chapter 11 through 15, it talks about the laws of purity for Israel, about how the unclean, well, one example is the unclean beasts and how they are not to be eating, the purification following childbirth, the laws of leprosy, the cleansing of leprosy, and also the issues from the human body. Second, in this section here in chapter 16, it goes in detail about the Day of Atonement. And it talks about what the Day of Atonement is. For example, you are forbidden to enter the holy place within the veil. That's chapter 16 verse 2. How the bathing and proper cleansing and dressing, the sin offering for self, and the sin offering for the people again, and how the blood is placed on the horn of the altar, still in chapter 16. So it goes in detail about the Day of Atonement, and that's in chapter 16, 1 through 34. Through 34, that section there. Also in chapter 17, it talks about, again, it goes into the law concerning sacrifices. So it goes back and talks about the law concerning sacrifices, such as no eating of blood, eating that which is died of itself or was worn. That's chapter 17, verse 15 through 16. The last section of this book deals with morality, and that's chapter 18 up to the end of the book, which is chapter 27 and verse 34. The first of this section here, it deals with unlawful marriages and lust, chapter 18, 1 through 30. It deals with incest as first, homosexuality second, and also bestiality and next, and that's chapter 18, 6, 22, and 23. It talks about in chapter 19 to 20 about laws concerning moral uncleanness. Then it talks about rules govern the behavior of priests, how they are to act, how the priest is supposed to act, and that's in chapter 21 to 22. Chapter 23, 1 through 44, deals with the feast and holy days, and it goes through 6 of them. First, it talks about the 7th day, which is the Sabbath day. It talks about the Passover, verse 23 to 4 through 14. Pentecost, or the first fruits, 15 to 21. The Feast of Trumpets, which is New Year's Day of Civil Year. That's in 22 through 25. The Day of Atonement, 26 through 32. The Feast of Tabernacles, which is 33 through 44. Then still in this section, it again talks about the sabbatical year, which is every seven years. This is chapter 25, 1 through 7. The year of Jubilee, which is every 50th year. That's in chapter 25, 8 through 24. And what they are to do at the year of Jubilee, I thought was interesting, in how they are to, the treatment of the poor on that year, land sold and redeemed, treatment of a brother, which is a Jew, a brother Jew, and also redeeming Jews sold to non-Jews. I thought it was interesting how the year of Jubilee and what they did during this period. Then in chapter 26, it deals with the promises and warnings, blessings for obedience and curse for disobedience. And it talks about all through that, through the Old Testament. We see that if you are obedient to God, there's blessing. If you are disobedient, there's curses with that. And in chapter 27, it deals with vows and tithes. If you make a vow, you are to make sure that you keep it. And also tithes also as well. Well, that's kind of the overview of Leviticus that I was able to kind of give you. I hope it was beneficial to you in some way. There's quite a bit of, I guess, what I took from this book here, of what I guess one could take from this book, is I think you could take by the emphasis, number one, on the three key words. I thought those three key words were very key to this book, and that was holy, that was sacrifice, and atonement. And so those three key words I thought were really evident or key in understanding this book or the theme that is talked about in this book. So I thought I'd just point that out as a way for you, maybe in your personal study. Well, the lesson is yours. Again, it was kind of an overview of Leviticus, of the book. So I hope it was beneficial to you in some way. If you want the outline, I do have an outline. If you have an interest, it won't take me a moment just to print it out for you, maybe to help you in your study and understand the book. But before we close, we always want to extend the invitation to anyone who would like to obey the gospel. You have to hear, believe, repent, confess, and be baptized. You may have taken those steps. Please come now and stand as we sing the